Welcome back, dear listener. Tonight, we're heading into the world of medieval beauty. Strange rules, painful routines, and outfits that were more about survival or showing off than comfort. Because in the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't just skin deep. It was moral. It was spiritual. And sometimes it was downright dangerous. A pale face meant you were rich enough to avoid the sun. A high forehead meant you were clever. At least, that's what they told each other while plucking out their eyebrows. Fashion back then was more than a trend. It was a statement. One that could win a marriage or attract a priest's disapproval. Sometimes both at the same time. People dressed to show who they were, what they believed, and what they could afford. And sometimes just how much discomfort they could handle in the name of looking respectable. This was a world of trailing sleeves and towering headdresses, of perfume pouches and powder made with, let's just say, things we wouldn't put on our faces today. Shoes were so long, they had to be tied to your legs. And if you wore the wrong color, you could be fined. Because yes, even your wardrobe was policed. It wasn't just about looking nice. It was about showing your place in the world. Too plain, and you looked poor. Too fancy, and you looked sinful. It was a delicate balance, and very few people got it right. So tonight, let's walk quietly through this strange world. A world where beauty hurt, where fashion had rules, and where the mirror didn't just reflect your face, it reflected your soul. Let's begin. In medieval Europe, the face was a declaration. A pale, unblemished canvas spoke of ivory towers and sheltered windows. Sunlight was for laborers. For the privileged, avoiding the sun became an art form. Curtains were drawn at dawn. Tinted glass. Windows turned castles into dim retreats. Faces were dusted with powders made from lead, chalk, or crushed pearls. Each morning, women and men of means smeared these pastes on skin, praying the white mask held until supper. A flake of powder rolling down a cheek could invite questions. A dropped smudge near the mouth risked scandal. Every clouded mirror brimmed with caution. The ideal cheek held just a whisper of color. A gentle rose, as if breathed on by cold air. Too much red suggested ill health or impropriety. To achieve this, some pinched their flesh until it glowed. Others pressed wine-soaked rags to skin or dabbed crushed insects. Cochineal gave vivid pink tones, but bit like poison. Clergy condemned rouge as the devil's paint. Sermons warned against artifice and sin. Yet behind fans and veils, court ladies kept their secrets. Between furtive glances, they applied color in darkness. A single drop of pigment joined beauty and danger in equal measure. High foreheads became an obsession of refinement. A forehead as smooth and tall as a moonlit sky hinted at learning and divine favor. To sculpt this ideal, many plucked hairlines with bronze tweezers or sharpened shells. Each tug tore at skin and nerve. Tears proved dedication. Eyebrows and eyelashes were removed as distractions. The process left faces bare, like blank pages awaiting Holy Scripture. Monks noted the irony of seeking godly wisdom through self-inflicted pain. Yet each exposed brow brought the promise of status and intellect. Beauty crossed lines of class and law. Sumptuary edicts forbade commoners from wearing certain fabrics, dyes, or powders. A weaver's wife using pearl dust faced a fine. A duchess scattering the same powder paid no price. These rules turned every mirror into a courtroom. The reflection could condemn or confirm one's place in society. Those born into privilege flaunted velvet and silk, their faces gleaming under layers of cosmetics. Laborers remained untouched by vanity, their sun-darkened skin a badge of honest work. The subtle divide of hue and texture mapped the medieval world. Cleanliness carried its own contradictions. Bathing too often invited whispers of sin. Water was said to open the body to evil spirits. So many washed faces and hands in basins, scented with thyme or lavender. A brisk splash of vinegar water cleared pores without tempting demons. Tooth care meant rubbing cloth with mint or chewing aromatic herbs. Perfume pouches filled with frankincense or ambergris dangled from belts, warding off odors that suggested sin or sickness. Each fragrance became a weapon in the silent battle against natural humors and social censure. Eyes, though hidden behind heavy lids of powder, still spoke. Dark kohl-traced rims to guard against glare and pests. It also framed windows to the soul, as preachers liked to remind the faithful. Yet the same glass that saved eyes from glare carried reflections of vanity. Every glance at one's reflection risked pride. Lady and monk alike stared at faces. They had sculpted and condemned. In candlelight and dawn's first gray, each gaze measured success or failure in meeting the unspoken covenants of beauty. Cloth stitched around shoulders and chests shaped more than bodies. Sideless gowns open. At the rib, revealed layers beneath and invited scandal. The way fabric draped could provoke sermons. Tightly drawn girdles gave an illusion of slender waists, but left bruises and breathlessness in their wake. Pointed shoes, known as pelanes or krakows, extended well beyond the toes. Some reached a foot in length, forcing nobles to tie them to their calves. Each step became performance art. Every stumble became a spectacle. Yet these elongated shapes declared wealth more loudly than any dyed robe. Headdresses rose like towers atop powdered heads. Hennins, tall and conical, sometimes, extended 3 feet skyward. Veils trailed behind, turning every doorway into a ritual threshold. To enter a room was to risk tearing fine fabric or colliding with low beams. The wearer moved with deliberate caution. A misstep could ruin a valuable piece of cloth and bring public humiliation. Still, the height signaled power and prestige in equal measure. Those who removed their hennins revealed the soft dough of hair beneath, bound tightly in linens soaked with oils and herbs. In the silence between rituals of beauty, the body bore witness to its perils. Lead poisoning crept through veins. Infections festered under layers of makeup. Gangrene claimed feet bound too tightly by leather and laces. Lice thrived in wigs and veils. Many endured sores and fevers without complaint. Pain became part of the beauty bargain. Suffering verified sincerity. If the flesh hurt, the mask was earned. And in the end, the mirror held more than a face. It held history. Every powder smudge, every pinched cheek, every elongated hem told a story of ambition, belief, and sacrifice. It reflected a world where appearance wielded power over life and death. A world where beauty was bondage and freedom, cruelty and devotion, all at once. Now, pause in this quiet glow. Reflect on powder and pain, on laws written in dye, on perfumes that masked both sweat and sign. This is the face of medieval beauty. It is strange. It is haunting. It was everything. Cloth was a statement louder than any spoken word. Velvet and silk spoke of wealth. Wool and linen spoke of work. Dyes mattered. Deep red robes carried the cost of crushed insects. Rich purples whispered of emperors. Commoners caught wearing forbidden hues paid fines or worse. Every stitch declared a person's place in the world. Layers defined shape and status. Under tunics, padded rolls smoothed rough edges. Over gowns, surcoats draped in heavy fabric hinted at abundance. Sideless gowns revealed the chemise beneath, a scandalous peek at flesh and a way to show the layers only the rich could afford. Sleeves ballooned into hanging banners of cloth, so long they brushed the ground. Some nobles trimmed corners of their sleeves to avoid ruin others, simply accepted the mud as part of the price. belts and girdles cinched waists with leather straps or braided cords. Not tight enough to break a bone yet. That came later with steel-boned corsets. In this era, the squeeze was gentler, but still uncomfortable. A narrow waist showed discipline. It said, "I endure." Breath came in shallow gasps. Walks felt measured. Dancing required covert gasps between steps. Anyone who complained risked being called weak. Sumptuary laws turned wardrobes into portfolios. A baker's daughter in satin faced harsh judgment. A baron's wife in homespun faced pity. The law drew lines around cloth and class. Parishioners gossiped about anyone who stepped over them. Tailors carried hidden rule books. Clients asked, "Can I wear this color?" More often, "Will this get me in trouble?" Every purchase required self-awareness, and sometimes a secret coin for a bribe. Fashion spread slowly, like a rumor. Courtiers returned from travels with new ideas of sleeve shape or neckline height. Word of mouth moved faster than actual cloth. A rumor of a sweeping hem could send tailors into a frenzy. Some stitched in moonlight to finish a gown in time for court. Others copied styles from tapestry's second-hand reflections of first-hand opulence. Dirt clung to hems. Rain turned wide. Skirts into mud traps. Yet no one shortened a gown. A trip in public meant to show a chance to prove one's wealth by brushing off the event and forging on. Those who stumbled too often risked whispers that money couldn't buy grace. Furs lined collars and cloak edges. Fox, sable, and marten brought warmth and status. Only those with connections to the hunt could claim authenticity. Others wore painted imitations, often peeling in rain, yet even paint counted. The effort implied aspiration, and aspiration was nearly as valuable as the real thing. Embroidery turned fabric into storytelling. Gold thread wove symbols of family crests. Silk floss created images of flowers that grew only in distant lands. Needlework belonged to ladies in hidden chambers, working by candlelight. Piety and pride intertwined as they stitched psalms into hymns so that whatever their sins, their gowns whispered devotion. Accessories finished the ensemble. Belts hung with daggers, not for defense, but for display. Leather pouches carried coins and scented herbs. Gloves tanned from deerskin fit snugly, protecting hands from cold and from revealing work calluses. A nobleman might carry a silver-handled mirror into council, a private token of vanity that contradicted vows of humility. Through it all ran the tension between modesty and display. The church preached simplicity, yet its leaders wore brocaded vestments that rivaled the finest gowns. Sermons denounced pride, but in stained glass windows, bishops stood in robes encrusted with jewels. Parishioners looked on in awe. They learned that beauty belonged both to heaven and to earth, and that distinguishing between the two was the work of a lifetime. In this tapestry of cloth and rule, the body became a canvas and a caged stage. Each garment weighed the wearer's soul. Every fold held meaning. To dress was to declare allegiance to king, to church, to self. The sway of silk and the drag of velvet defined identity. They told stories that words could not capture, of birth, of faith, of power, and of the constant ache to be seen and to belong. And so we arrive at a curious contradiction. For a society obsessed with modesty, restraint, and Christian virtue, medieval Europe certainly wasn't shy about spending hours trying to look like a sickly, hairless angel who'd recently seen a ghost. Beauty wasn't just skin deep. It was a theological statement, a social signal, and more often than not, a practical hazard. But vanity didn't stop at the face. Let's talk about the rest of the body. And yes, buckle up, because things only get stranger from here. The ideal medieval body, if you were aiming to impress the nobility or catch the eye of a local lord, was less about curves or muscles. more about looking like you floated gently through cathedrals without ever actually touching the ground. Slender, delicate, ethereal, that was the ticket. Women were expected to have long necks, narrow shoulders, tiny waists, and rounded bellies. Yes, you heard that right. Having a soft, domed stomach was seen as elegant. A sign of fertility, they said. And no, there were no gym selfies to prove it. To enhance this look, women wore tightly cinched gowns with high waistlines just under the bust, flowing down into soft, voluminous skirts. The gowns often had long, trailing sleeves and trains that collected every piece of mud from the castle courtyard. The less practical your outfit, the more noble you were perceived to be. Peasants had to wear what worked. Nobles wore what looked good when you were standing very still. Then there were the shoes. Oh, the shoes. Enter the Pulaina fashion so ridiculous, it almost deserves its own documentary. Pulaines were shoes with absurdly long pointed toes, sometimes stretching over 2 feet long. So long, in fact, that they had to be tied to your knees with little chains so you wouldn't trip over yourself. The longer your toe, the higher your status. It was basically the medieval version of a sports car. Men in particular embraced the Pulaine craze, along with tight hose that left very little to the imagination. The silhouette was unmistakable. Tailors began designing codpieces. Yes, those padded flaps at the front, not just for modesty, but as fashion statements. Let's just say subtlety was not the point. And while women were plucking their hairlines and dusting themselves in mud, men weren't entirely off the hook. They curled their hair, powdered it with fragrant dusts, and often carried ornate mirrors in their belts. Beauty was a shared responsibility and a competitive one. Clothing colors were also part of the statement. Deep reds, royal blues, and rich purples were reserved for those who could afford the dyes. Sumptuary laws often dictated who could wear what color, what fabric, and even how much fur could be stitched onto a sleeve. That's right, too much ermine, and you might get fined. Or worse, be accused of pretending to be richer than you are. Fashion police weren't just a joke, they were very real, and very serious. Next came the hair, and here's where we step into another level of bizarre. Married women were expected to hide their hair under veils, wimples, and elaborate linen contraptions that looked more architectural than wearable. But the unmarried girls? They could show their hair, and they often did, letting it flow in long, curled waves to signal their availability. Hair was currency, and everyone knew how to spend it. Even within monasteries and convents, beauty practices quietly survived. Nuns used rose water and herbal pastes. Monks sometimes had their own grooming. Routines, though modesty was the official rule. The line between piety and preening was negotiable. All this, of course, was shaped by a culture deeply invested in appearances. Not for frivolity's sake, but because beauty reflected order, status, and virtue. To look good was to reflect the divine. Ugly, on the other hand, was often equated with sin, misfortune, or moral decay. A crooked nose or a sunburnt face might say more about your soul than your skincare. And so, the medieval world spun on, powdered and perfumed, pinched and plucked. A world where looking right mattered almost as much as living right. Maybe even more. Now, let's step further into the world of medieval fashion, because we're not done, yet not even close. At this point in our medieval beauty journey, you're hopefully feeling grounded in the idea that very little of what people wore had to do with comfort. This was about status, about salvation, about surviving judgment divine or otherwise. Now let's dig further. We've already talked about the gowns, the outrageous codpieces, the shoes that could sweep floors without bending over. But you haven't even heard the half of it. In the 14th and 15th centuries, a high forehead was the hallmark of a refined woman. To have a generous amount of bare space above your eyebrows was, for reasons lost to time and Renaissance brain chemistry, considered extremely attractive. So women plucked. Not their eyebrows, those too, yes, but their hairlines. Sometimes several inches back. Imagine willingly receding your hairline and calling it a glow-up, and don't stop at the hair. Eyebrows were also plucked into oblivion. In fact, the less you had going on above the eyes, the better. The goal was a bear. Smooth, pale canvas from brow to crown, almost otherworldly, as if you were trying to erase your humanity one hair at a time. Combine that with skin powdered pale as milk, and you start to see how medieval beauty was about unearthliness. Ethereal purity. You weren't aiming to look healthy. You were aiming to look blessed, and blessed, apparently, had very little color. Rouge was a thing, yes. Some pink on the cheeks, made from roots, minerals, or sometimes crushed insects. But it had to be subtle. Too much color suggested you'd been outside or working. Heaven forbid anyone suspect you'd broken a sweat. Lips followed the same rules. A little bit of tint was acceptable, but bright red lips? That was the territory of prostitutes, not pious maidens. The church, ever the fashion critic, had opinions about vanity. And while they didn't outlaw lip staying, they made sure you knew that your soul might be at risk for looking too appealing. Hell, vanity was a sin, remember? So naturally, women found ways to look appealing while pretending it was accidental. Just a pinch of pink, just a dab of color. Nothing to see here. I woke up like this, pale, ghostly, and absolutely exhausted looking. A vision of sanctified femininity. Now let's talk about scent, because hygiene, as we understand it today, was not the medieval vibe. And yet smelling good still mattered. Enter pomanders, little balls of scented herbs and resins, often worn on chains or tucked into pockets, to mask the realities of daily medieval life, which included the joyful aromas of open sewers, unwashed bodies, and animal dung. Perfume existed, but again, subtlety was key. Heavy scents were suspicious. Light floral or herbal notes, lavender, rosemary, rosewater, were preferred. If you were very fancy, your scent might come from imported spices or exotic flower oils. If you were not, you might have just rubbed yourself with herbs and hoped for the best. And before we move on body hair, that's right, hair removal existed. It's not a modern obsession. Recipes for hair removal creams made of vinegar, quicklime, and arsenic pop up in manuscripts. Was it effective? Sometimes. Was it safe? Absolutely not. But smooth skin, especially under the arms, was a quiet marker of nobility. Because a woman with leisure had time to burn her follicles off with medieval napalm dot beauty, after all, is pain. And in the Middle Ages, it was also potentially toxic, spiritually dangerous, and very, very plucked. Let's continue our quiet, uncomfortable walk through medieval beauty ideals. At this point, you may be wondering how far someone would go in the name of beauty. The answer is very far. Far enough to get poisoned, mocked, or excommunicated. Sometimes all three. Let's talk about Lead. Lead was one of the hidden stars of the medieval makeup bag. It wasn't new. Either people had been whitening their faces with lead-based concoctions since ancient Rome. But in the Middle Ages, it made a real comeback. If you were a noble woman, and your complexion wasn't ghostly pale, people might assume you'd been spending time outdoors, which was fine for peasants, but not for you. No, you were meant to be delicate, a petal, practically translucent. So, you mixed lead with vinegar into something called Venetian ceruse, and you slathered it on like foundation. The results? Striking. Deadly, but striking. Long-term use caused everything from hair loss to tooth rot to eventual death. But hey, better. To die pale and admired than live ruddy and ignored. That brings us neatly to the teeth. Teeth in the medieval period were a complicated matter. On one hand, people didn't consume sugar the way we do now, so their teeth weren't quite as wrecked by sweets. On the other hand, dental hygiene was still a gamble. Tooth powders existed, often made from crushed herbs, charcoal, or even burnt bread. These helped scrub the teeth, but let's just say Minty Freshness was not the medieval brand. Smiles, though? Those mattered. You might not see rows of gleaming white teeth in paintings, but the ideal was still there. Well kept. Neat, and preferably not black. The rich had more access to rudimentary dental care. Poor folks? Well, they just hoped not to lose too many before 30. Now, let's visit the eyes. Eyes were the windows to the soul, and possibly also to social climbing. Some women darkened their lashes and brows using burnt cork or soot. Others highlighted their eyes with plant-based dyes, like elderberry or mulberry juice. But remember, subtlety ruled. Dramatic eyes were fine if you were acting on a stage or planning to seduce someone out of a monastery. But in daily life, a gentle enhancement was all you got. And speaking of monasteries, monks and nuns also played the beauty game. Sure, they gave up worldly pleasures, but grooming? Still important. Tonsured monks, with their shaved crowns and ring of hair, were not going for fashion forward, exactly, but it was a look. A look that said, I belong to God and also to a world where bald spots are trendy. Meanwhile, nuns kept their appearance. Modest. Hair hidden, faces plain, but cleanliness still mattered. Because even in pious isolation, judgment never slept. Let's not forget the nails. Neatly trimmed, clean nails were a sign that you had time and help. Dirty, cracked hands. That was peasant territory. The wealthy used rose water, almond oil, and even tiny tools to care for their hands. Sometimes the hands were the only part of the body not completely hidden, so they had to impress. By now, you've probably noticed the pattern. Most beauty practices in the medieval period were about looking like you didn't live in the medieval period. You were supposed to look soft, untouched, unbothered by weather, work, or the occasional rat infestation. You were supposed to be pale, hairless, odorless, and fragile. A sort of holy mannequin. A living prayer with eyebrows missing and a toxic. Paste melting into your pores. We haven't even reached the strangest parts yet, but we will. You might want to lie down for what's next. And yes, that's both a warning and a teaser. Let's move beyond the upper classes now. Because while the noble and the rich were busy soaking their hands in rose water and hiding their hair under silk cones, the lower classes had their own kind of fashion, a practical, patched-together, slightly itchy kind. Clothing for peasants had one primary goal: survive the weather. It wasn't about elegance. It was about durability. Wool was the staple, because it was warm, even when wet. You might have one tunic for daily wear and one for special occasions, by which we mean church or a funeral. Linen, if you could get. It was prized for undergarments, though most people just wore their wool until it gave up color, was less of a statement and more about access. Rich colors like deep reds, blues, and purples were expensive to produce and therefore banned from most wardrobes by default. Natural browns, grays, and dull greens ruled the day. If your outfit blended in with the countryside, congratulations, you were probably doing it right. But this didn't mean common folk didn't care about how they looked. Sunday best was a real thing. People would save their cleanest, least mended tunic from market day or mass. Some might decorate clothing with simple embroidery or add a belt to bring shape to an otherwise shapeless garment. And shoes, if you had leather shoes that actually fit, you were doing well. Hair was practical too. Women kept it tied up and covered, usually with a coif or simple scarf. Men often wore their short or tucked under a cap. No elaborate hennons here. No jeweled girdles or fur-lined sleeves. Just the basics. And makeup? That was generally a no. Not because they weren't interested, but because who had time? Or money? Or access to crushed pearls and imported rose oils? Beauty was more about cleanliness, or at least the appearance of it. A fresh face, a washed tunic, and you were ready to mingle. Even so, there was pressure. Peasants lived in tight-knit communities, and everyone noticed everything. A missing tooth, a mended hem, a writ that hadn't been patched. You might not have had beauty standards enforced by courtly poets or religious sermons, but you still had the judgment of your neighbor's dot, and let's not forget the seasonal flair. Straw hats in summer, layers in winter, and mud splattered everything in between. Fashion, for the medieval lower class, wasn't about impressing, it was about adapting, surviving, making it through another market day without freezing or falling apart. So while the noblewoman layered her veils and the knight adjusted his belt buckled just so, the farmer pulled on the same tunic he wore yesterday, slapped his cap on, and hoped it didn't rain. Again, and in its own way, that was a fashion statement too. Now, let's step into the world of scent and hygiene areas where medieval rules were both strict and strange. Washing the body, as we know, it didn't exist. Full baths were occasional and often communal, mixing water with more bodies and sins than cleanliness. Instead, daily hygiene focused on selective washing. Hands and faces dipped into basins of water scented with rosemary or thyme. Wealthier households added vinegar or rose petals to fend off disease and, more importantly, bad smells. Between washes, people carried pomanders, small, often ornate balls of herbs, ambergris, and spices hung around the neck or tucked into belts. These acted as portable air fresheners, crucial in towns where open sewers ran beneath cobbled streets. The smell of lavender or cinnamon promised virtue. The stench of refuse betrayed poverty. Tooth care combined necessity and superstition. Tooth powders made from crushed mint leaves, charcoal, or the ashes of burnt bread scrubbed the teeth, aiming to avoid foul breath more than sparkle. Tongue scrapers carved from metal or bone removed food particles, an early tool in the fight against gossip and judgment. Hair washing was rare. Instead, hair treatments aimed to keep lice at bay. Combs of antler or wood removed pests when possible. Oils infused with cedar or juniper lent shine and deterred bugs. Yet even these practices carried risk. Too much oil attracted dirt and debris, creating ideal habitats for insects. Underarm hair removal was known but painful. Recipes for depilatory creams involving quicklime and vinegar appear in manuscripts. Applied cautiously, they removed hair but could burn the skin. The goal was smooth, hairless underarms, proof of leisure and status, since only someone with servants could endure such treatments. And when illness struck, scent became medicine. Herbal poultices pressed to the brow or chest claimed draw out miasmas, the bad air believed to cause disease. Lavender-stuffed pillows promised restful sleep. Chambers scattered with sprigs of rue or rosemary stood guard against spirits and contagion alike. In medieval hygiene and scent, every drop of water, every herb, and every spice carried meaning. They were tools of survival, markers of rank, and symbols of a world ever aware that the line between purity and pollution could be crossed with a single misstep or a single unwashed body. In medieval Europe, beauty's price was steep and sometimes fatal. The same powders that crafted porcelain skin could corrode flesh. The gowns that shaped ideal waists could constrict breathing until consciousness faded. Every beauty ritual carried risk, often hidden beneath layers of silk and sermons. Consider lead-based cosmetics, a staple of noble vanity. Venetian ceruse, made from white lard and vinegar, promised the palest complexions. Yet with every daily application, the toxic paste seeped into pores. Over months and years, skin thinned, hair fell out, gums receded, teeth loosened. Many wore their fine robes to funerals. They attended as mourners of their own health. Mercury and arsenic found their way into powders and ointments, sold as remedies. For blemishes, they smoothed scars and vultures' bites. But they also poisoned from within. Joint pain, tremors, and madness stalked the afflicted. Inscriptions in alchemy texts warned of dosage, but in practice, dosage was guesswork. The line between cure and curse blurred in candlelit laboratories. Corsetry's ancestor tight-laced bodices and girdles sought a slender silhouette. Unlike the later steel corsets, these linen or leather bindings constricted ribs and organs subtly but relentlessly. Noble women reported breathlessness and fainting spells. Plague survivors, already weakened, sometimes collapsed under the invisible weight of fashion as surely as under disease. Pointed poulaines, those absurdly long-toed shoes, embodied status and hazard. A nobleman's 2-foot-long poulaines required lacing to calves or chains to tunics. Every step risked a tumble. Falls could twist ankles or break bones. Yet to undo the chains was an admission of poverty or worse. Practicality over prestige. Perfumed gloves protected hands and masked odors. But leather tanned with toxic agents sometimes delivered chemical burns. The same tannins that imparted softness gave rise to rashes and sores beneath the supple hide. Hair dyes and tints promised vibrant hues: ginger, gold, or ebony. Recipes included plant extracts, but also urine or metal salts. Dyes sometimes reacted unpredictably, staining skin or burning scalp. Some unfortunate used lye-based mixtures, leaving raw, blistered flesh. Even social rituals bore physical costs. Ladies attended elaborate masquerades and court festivities where they wore weighted veils, jeweled belts, and metal-reinforced bodices. Dancing for hours in heavy garments induced cramps, fainting, and dehydration. Yet to decline was to renounce one's rank. The church preached moderation, but profit often trumped piety. Monastic gardens grew herbs used in cosmetics. Apothecaries sold elaborate potions. Sermons decried pride, but the market thrived on desire. A fatal irony. Beauty, meant to reflect divine perfection, often resulted in corporeal ruin. How many collapsed behind velvet tapestries, victims of their own reflections? We will never know. Their effigies in tombs show serene faces, untouched by the suffering that polished their skin. The cost of beauty in the Middle Ages was measured not in coins, but in blood, breath, and broken bones. It reminds us that every standard of attractiveness carries its casualties. In the pursuit of an ideal, the body becomes both canvas and casualty, and while some perished in quiet suffering, others bore lifelong scars. Face masks to apply beauty. Pastes left indentations and sores. Charitable sisters in convents recounted caring for women whose skin was blistered beyond recognition. Wealthy patrons could afford the best remedies, miraculous salves rumored to counteract Leeds poison, but for most, cure was as elusive as the ideal complexion. Beyond cosmetics, dietary regimens joined the arsenal of beauty. Cutting edge. Medieval physicians prescribed foods to alter one's appearance. Lean meats and bitter greens promised to clear the skin. Sweet fruits and rich confections threatened to spark humors that manifested in pimples or flushes. Yet these diets bordered on starvation or indigestion. Noble tables offered delicacies spiced with exotic imports: cinnamon from the Levant, ginger from India ostensibly to improve the flesh. But overindulgence in sugar-laced foods, reserved for the privileged, triggered fungal infections and tooth decay. undoing any cosmetic advantage. Some suffered from allergic reactions to the very substances meant to beautify them. Egg whites and tree gums mixed into face masks sometimes caused severe rashes. Animal fats used in ointments stained clothing and linens. Launderers balked at the greasy fibers. Upholstery in great halls turned rancid with every glamour session. Inviting insects and the wrath of household stewards. Let us not overlook the tragedy of hair practices gone awry. Tonsure in monastic orders sometimes led to scalp infections if razors were shared without sterilization. Among laity, the quest for golden tresses led to the use of sulfur-based solutions. When concocted incorrectly, these mixtures literally earned hair shafts, leaving bald patches behind. And then there were the fashion-related outbreaks of disease. Scholars note that epidemics of scabies and lice thrived among populations wearing layered garments, reused without proper airing or washing. Veils and hennins kept vermin close to the skin, transmitting itch and infection. Even furs lining cloaks harbored fleas. When fleas carried the plague, fashion became death's accomplice. Childbirth, too, intersected with beauty's hazards. Noble mothers, expected to present well, even weeks after delivery, used body-binding techniques, garments cinched around weakened bodies, to restore pre-pregnancy silhouettes. The pressure on internal organs aggravated postpartum hemorrhage and infections. Some midwives whispered that corsetry had claimed more lives than complications from birth itself. Cosmetic sellers exploited public fear with miracle cures ointments. Infused with unicorn horn powder, actually ground narwhal tusk, or phoenix tears, distilled amber. These elixirs, sold at exorbitant prices, contained dangerous ingredients like mercury and arsenic. Victims desperate for eternal youth applied them without hesitation, sealing their fate. Despite the risks, fashion bore on. Portraits commissioned by patrons displayed flawless skin, sculpted silhouettes, and elaborate adornments, reinforcing the myth that beauty was attainable, even divine. Behind closed doors, however, the reality was grim. Lacerations from pruning, cones, ulcers from ointment burns, and the slow ache of poisoned flesh. By the end of the Middle Ages, reformers decried these excesses. Church councils condemned cosmetics as instruments of Satan. Sumptuary laws tightened, outlawing certain garments and ingredients. Yet demand remained. Women and men continued to flock to perfumers and apothecaries, chasing a visage that promised status, security, and spiritual favor. The cruelty of medieval beauty warns us. Any ideal that bears high cost demands scrutiny. When reflection on surface surpasses care for substance, humanity pays in pain. In our modern age, echoes of these trends persist: skin treatments with harsh chemicals, body-shaping devices that strain the flesh, and the relentless pursuit of ephemeral perfection. The medieval mirror offers a sobering lesson. True beauty should not be called forth at the expense of one's health or dignity. The pursuit of beauty in medieval and Elizabethan times was not merely a personal endeavor, but a societal expectation, often enforced through perilous means. From the toxic allure of Venetian cerus to the constricting embrace of corsetry, individuals subjected themselves to harmful practices to align with prevailing beauty standards. These rituals, steeped in danger, were a testament to the lengths to which people would go to attain societal approval and personal satisfaction. The ramifications of these beauty practices were profound. Lead-based cosmetics led to chronic health issues, including skin deterioration and systemic poisoning. The use of mercury and arsenic in ointments caused neurological damage, while tight-laced garments impaired respiratory function and organ health. These consequences underscore the physical toll exacted by the relentless quest for aesthetic perfection. Despite the passage of centuries, echoes of these hazardous beauty standards persist today. Modern society continues to grapple with the balance between aesthetic appeal and health, as seen in the ongoing debates over cosmetic procedures and body image ideals. The historical context of medieval beauty practices serves as a poignant reminder of the potential costs associated with conforming to societal expectations of appearance.